What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. We're going to be ranking the rookie running backs from a fantasy football perspective pre-draft. I'll do this exact same video, probably like the week after the draft. We'll see how draft capital, landing spot, all those things impacts everyone. But right now, this is just a pre-draft perspective. So, right off the bat, Bijan, obviously put him at the top. He's in a tier of his own. I have a model that will project the best season in fantasy over the first 3 years of every running back's career. And if you compare the results of Bijan to the last 3 years, he's 4 points per game higher than any other running back. If you look at just this year, he's 6 points per game better. There is just a huge difference. I think everyone knows that. We're going to move on very quickly from Bijan, but he's just so clearly in a tier of his own. He's going to go in that, like, my guess, 8 to 15 range. I don't think he goes earlier than 8. I think 8's where the Falcons are picking. But that's kind of where we're expecting him to go. But even if, say he falls to like 17, something like that. I just picked a random number, but somewhere in the mid first, and we see Gibbs go in like the late first. And we see, maybe they're a little bit equal. Even if their ADPs are like 12, 15 spots away, there's still a big gap between Bijan and everyone else in this class. Just to be clear on that. In this second tier, I'm only going to put 2 running backs. We're going to put Gibbs and we're going to put Charbonet. Now, when I put all their athletic stats, their production stats, their projected draft capital, all that stuff into the model, it's saying that if Gibbs can go in round 1, he's definitely going to separate from Charbonet. But I've seen a lot of mocks that kind of have him right on the bubble there in that 30 to 40 range. And so if we see Gibbs fall, into that second round, I'm not going to like him as much. And it's going to be very closer. I mean, not going to like him as much. He's still going to be in this tier. He's still going to be awesome. But I've definitely seen people who think that Gibbs is in a tier of his own. And my guess is that he goes in the early second round. And just given his size, given that we're pretty sure he's not going to be a feature back, whereas, with Charbonet, definitely a chance that he is, and we'll get to him in a second. I think these two are much, much closer. My model thinks they're much, much closer. If you don't know, Gibbs, 199 pounds, that's not too small, right? We've seen plenty of running backs produce at around that range, because let's be honest, 199 is pretty close to 200. If we're seriously going to do a cutoff and say, no one under 200, he could show up to camp at 201. It really doesn't matter. Those are very, very similar weights. But in that general mold of running back, we know he's awesome in the receiving game. We know he's going to be good. He's incredibly fast. It's, will he ever be featured and also get 15 to 17 carries a game? I don't know if that's the case. Whereas with Charbonet in the same tier, I consider them together because Charbonet's got the size, 6 foot, 214, and obviously he's not as fast as Gibbs. He's not as good in the receiving game, but he's still good in the receiving game. He can still pass block. And I think a team's going to draft him to potentially be a day one starter, or at least have a very strong role on day one. So through now, Bijan at the top. We've got Gibbs. We've got Charbonet kind of in that second tier. And then you get to this next tier, which we're going to kind of maybe name some of the tiers later on. It's a tier of players that I'm pretty sure are going to be good. It's just if you had to have me say, who am I most confident in? I just can't put them on the same level as Charbonet and Gibbs. I know at worst, if Gibbs doesn't get that early down work, he's going to be productive in fantasy because of those receptions. We know the receptions will be there. We know Charbonet is good, is going to be used. And we're pretty sure on these guys, but we're not completely sold. And I will say this draft class isn't crazy good. There's gonna be a lot of players we talk about today in other videos that I have positive things to say about them, but there's no way we can look at this draft class at most positions besides tight end, and even tight end I have some questions about. It's just a weak kind of class overall. But first player we'll go over is Tyjae Spears. Film grinders really like him. You guys know I'm not a film grinder. That's just never something I'm going to be. But I know analysts that I trust to look at, and the film experts like him. So that's a plus. My model likes him a good amount. It spits out a comp of Alvin Kamara looking athletically. I think it's a good comp in the sense that if you picture Alvin Kamara, but make him not as good in the receiving game. Like obviously Kamara's strength is that. Make Kamara not as good at route running, not as good at catching the football, just like not as good in that area. That's kind of what I think the bull case is. So in my prospect model, I have like a bull projection and a bear projection that the model spits out as like similar players to where they could produce. The bull comp is an Alvin Kamara that can't catch as well. So if you're kind of like thinking about these players, that's kind of a good comp there. He does have similar size issues as with Gibbs. He's also like not nearly as fast. I mean, basically no one besides Achane is as fast as Gibbs is going to be in this class. But he's a very talented running back nonetheless. He is probably not going to be drafted to be a day one starter. I would say the odds are the only ones that are drafted that way are these top three. I think that like everyone else, so it's like it's tough to say that that's like a negative if I'm kind of ranking him here, because no one else in this ranking probably will be. But I do think there's a possibility that through an injury, through just playing really well, he can become, you know, a pretty clear starter and someone we're trusting in fantasy. It's just his like, I wouldn't say he has breakaway speed, but his vision is really good and he can make people miss really well, in that he doesn't need to just burst through the line and just run for a touchdown like untouched, like some of these packs we're going to talk about could do, but he can just make people miss and his vision's really well. So I like him very much as a prospect. We'll put him first in this tier. After that is someone who will be relying on their speed, and that's Achane. 4.32 40-yard dash. Obviously, the big negative with him, 188 pounds. And if we kind of talked about, you know, Gibbs saying like, well, we're not 100% sure that he's going to get, you know, 15 to 17 carries a game. What's like, if you have any sort of concerns like that for Gibbs, you have to have that for Achane, you know, like 11 pounds lighter. My model comps him to CJ Spiller, Naheem Hines, and Chris Johnson. Like those are just kind of like general comps it throws out there. But even thinking about that, he's 10 pounds lighter than Spiller and Hines. He's obviously not as fast as Chris Johnson. And so kind of like mold those players together a little bit. And it's also assuming early third round draft capital. We're going to talk about a few players where draft capital matters more. I think he's one of them. So it's going to be him. Obviously, you guys know like Deuce Vaughn. We're going to talk about matters for him too. It matters for these smaller backs because my model really penalizes when they fall. The production is there for Achane. The athletic measurables are there. He can be really good. But if he falls in the draft, it's a signal to the model that NFL teams are not confident. And it's going to really weight that weight and say, okay, this is a glaring reason why teams are not super confident, and it's going to tank him. And so if he falls in the draft, he's going to move down because we're going to lose confidence. If he goes earlier, like once he goes in like the second round, well, now a team is looking at him being like, okay, we actually can use him. We know how to use him. We want to use him. The model is going to look a lot more towards that production, which was there for Achane. So we're going to put him here, but he can definitely move. Next up, hopefully I'm not butchering the last name. For all of these players, let me know if I'm saying the last names right, or the first names, honestly. But Isreal Abanikanda, model loves him. He's one of the players that I don't actually know what I put in for his exact like projected draft capital. I want to say he's projected to go in that 100 to 120 range, that like general range. But it loves him like more than that capital. He is a former track star, 216 pounds, so he doesn't have that same weight concern as some of these other running backs have. Insane college production, not because he's super agile and he's like making people miss, but because he's a home run hitter. If he hits the hole and he starts going, he's getting to the second level very, very fast. And we saw a lot of games in college where he just bursts through, has these really long touchdowns, and that's where he's getting the production. To me, it makes him like a boom bust player in the NFL. I don't want to compare him to like Darrell Henderson, but like think about that in your mind. Like Henderson was a player in college where he had insane production because he was hitting for so many long touchdowns, but we haven't really seen that translate into the NFL. So that's one thing that could happen. But if it doesn't, like, he's still a really good player. He's got that size. Not amazing in the receiving game, so that's going to cap our upside in fantasy. We want players good in the receiving game. But that can always be fixed. At least, like, you can't fix Achane's 188 pounds. He's not going to be 215 pounds. It's never going to happen. So at least we've got the frame with Abanikanda. But yeah, the receiving game is a limitation, and we can't be like totally sure that he's going to rip off a bunch of long touchdowns. C tier. I'm going to name this one just like the landing spot tier. We're going to put a lot of players here, and it's really going to be not only draft capital, like some of these guys are going to be really dependent on how the NFL views them, but what team do they go on to? Do they go on to a team where they're a pass catching specialist, but they already have an established one? Are they going like an early down grinder and you've already got a clear lead back, and so there's no real like immediate role for them? Like, all these things are going to be very heavily dependent on this tier. We're going to start off with Roschon, and the obvious knock for him is production. But I'm actually surprised. My model looks mostly at production, right? And if you look on the website, you see red. Like, you see red under like a bunch of metrics that the model looks at, and you're like, how is he so high? Like, there's running backs below him that have much better production. I was surprised at that as well. It can be the size. I mean, 6 foot 220. The model is obviously going to like that. 5 or 4. If you ran a 5-second 40, that would not be good. A 4.58 40-yard dash isn't like crazy, but at 220 pounds, it's more than enough size adjusted speed. It's really just the sample size that is the negative here. And for those of you who don't know, he was backing up Bijan at Texas, right? So that's why the production wasn't there. So it's like, usually when you have these running backs, it's like, okay, we might think that they're good, but like, what was the reason? Why wasn't the coach using them in college? Is that going to translate to the NFL? It's like, well, we know the reason. Like, no running back in the past few years would have had production behind Bijan Robinson. And when you look at his like per touch numbers, they're very, very good. He makes people miss. He is very explosive. He forces missed tackles, good after contact. Like, he's a very, very, very good running back. My question is just, in not putting him in the B tier, is will that translate when he's getting a ton of touches? Or will he not get a ton of touches, which also would put him in this tier as well? We look at his freshman year. I think I don't remember the exact number, like 120 or something like that, over 100 carries. Since then, he never even hit 100. Like, he was always in that like 80 to 90 carry range. And so it's like, you can be really good on a per touch basis, but if you're not getting that many, like, are you still going to be that productive if you're getting 15 to 17 carries, which is what we want for a high-end producer in fantasy? So we'll see how early goes. We'll see if there's like a clear path to touches for him, but definitely good potential here. It's just the sample size, not high enough. Next up, Tank Bigsby, not to be confused with Tank Dell, who would be the like 165-pound wide receiver. This is Tank Bigsby. Honestly, I put him in this tier because like nothing excites me. Like, there's something about all the first 6, right, where I can look to and I can say, this is something that they can win in the NFL. The model really likes them. I like this aspect of their game. It's like, Tank's not bad. He's just good at everything, but not great at everything. It's like, he's got a fine athletic profile. He's, above average size adjusted speed, but like below average burst. So he's just like fine in that area. Good production, but not like crazy production in college. Good in the receiving game, but like, definitely not as good as many other running backs in this class. It's almost like a discount version of Charbonet. Like, I love Charbonet because he's good at everything. It's like Tank is like fine at everything. I don't know. Like, it's just like a lesser version of that. And to me, there's a bigger chance that like a team looks at that and says, well, I can get that anywhere, right? Like, I can find a running back on free agency. I can find a running back in round 6, round 7 that's like mediocre at a bunch of things, or I can stream that, almost like stream it in like fantasy. I can get a third down back and early down back and kind of combine into you. So why do I need you? So that's just my concern with him. But it's still positive that like, he's not bad at anything, right? If he can do a bunch of different things, then he's, can fit any sort of mold that the team really wants. After him, same tier, Kendre Miller. Main concerns, passing game. And now, like, again, once we get into these other tiers, a lot of these players are like either or. So like either they're good at this or they're good at this. Tank was kind of like one of the exceptions. Roschon sort of one of the exceptions, but like he just didn't have enough touches in general, so we can't really know with him. But for almost like all of the others, it's like you're either good in the receiving game or you're good on the ground, and Kendre Miller was more just on the ground. We know that he is explosive. He didn't test in the combine. I don't think he's done a pro day yet. I'd have to check on that. I don't have numbers for what he ran for the 40, but I know that he is an explosive runner. I know he's going to run a fine time at it, and at 215 pounds, we have no size concerns and we have no speed concerns. I just have really no concerns overall about him on the ground. It's more, will he be used in the receiving game? Draft capital is, really going to tell us a lot here. Even at like 120, I think that's what I have right now in the model, is like projected around pick 120. He's coming off as like a decent pick in this kind of range. Higher or lower than that's really going to tell us a lot. And then, like I said, landing spot. It's just, will he be used at all in the receiving game? Zach Evans. We've got another early down grinder. Zach caught 1 pass per game in college. He was not used at all in pass protection. My model comps him to Sony Michel and Ronald Jones. Those are his like 2 big comps. That should kind of tell you a lot. And it's not like, oh, he can't be good. Like Sony Michel was a former first round pick, like shouldn't have been, but was okay in fantasy at times. He had 1 year, I don't remember what it was, but he scored a decent amount of touchdowns for New England. Like, didn't have a long career, didn't have an amazing career. Can potentially, we'll be saying the same thing about Ronald Jones, but it's not like they're bad. It's just for fantasy, I want those receptions, and I don't really see it with Zach Evans. But again, that being said, like both of them, Ronald Jones and Sony Michel, have had productive seasons even in fantasy because they were pretty decent on the ground at times. It'll just depend on what team grabs him. And now we got Deuce, the biggest discussion that we'll probably have in the fantasy space around running backs, because he's going to be so polarizing, right? 5'5", 179 pounds. You have to go back to, I think it's 1977 to find a running back at 5'5" who has produced more than 0 fantasy points. Like you have, I don't remember what year it was, maybe in like the 80s, there was a 5'5" running back, but he had negative fantasy points. It was like -3. You have to go back to 1977 to find someone this short that had production. I think 2 running backs ever, something like that, have had any sort of production. It was like 8 and 9 PPR points per game. It's nothing. Like there's just no cases. You go up to 5'6". There's like 2 success stories in the NFL. It's just unlikely. It's pretty unlikely that he does produce. But he had the touches. Like if you look back to college, 284 touches, 335 touches over the last 2 years, 49 and 42 receptions in those seasons. Like that's really good production. And clearly he's handling that sort of workload, so he could do it in the NFL. Obviously, maybe taking bigger hits. Obviously, there's better players in the NFL. But the point being, he can hold up to touches. Draft capital, like with Achane, going to be huge here. 179 pounds. If he tanks. Right now, the model is projecting a 5th round pick. If he goes in round 5, this is kind of where he's going in the rankings. If he falls into 6 or 7, the model is going to be like, no. Like, we have to tank him. Too short, too small. All those things. I don't care how good you are in the receiving game. I don't care how productive you were, because he was really productive in college. If he falls into round 6, round 7, it's going to say no. If he goes up at any amount, like if he goes in round like 3 or 4, he's not going to go in round 3, but if he were to go that high, the model is going to love him. I tested it out. I put him at like even just round 4 draft capital, and he skyrockets, because now it's saying, okay, the NFL is not as concerned as we thought they would be with his weight. And look at this production. He can be really good. He's got a great profile if he were bigger, and that wouldn't be as much of a concern if he goes earlier. So we'll definitely watch a draft capital with him as far as that. But yeah, C tier for him. Depends on draft capital and landing spot. Last person in this range, DeWayne McBride. Definitely have some issues with McBride. The model likes him a lot because he was highly productive. And he at least has like okay draft capital going in, like I think a little bit before Deuce is where he's projected to go, around round 4. If you look at his 490 college touches, 5 of them were in the receiving game. Like, of all the running backs we're talking about, they were like, oh, I don't know if they're going to be used in the receiving game. Like, DeWayne McBride had 5 touches in the receiving game in his entire college career. It's just so unlikely that he comes out of the draft, all of a sudden he's a pass catcher. Like, no, a team's not going to draft him in that way. And if you're not catching passes, your upside in fantasy just really isn't there. So he's like not really one of my favorite picks. But if you look, you're like, okay, well then why is the model projecting him at least decently? He's top 10 in this draft class in percent of team rushing yards, percent of team touchdowns, touch share, like all these metrics for production. He's like top 10. It's just that he's not using the receiving game, and that's really going to hurt. After this, looking at the D tier, this is basically the tier that's like, they're probably going to be mediocre, but I don't have like a super strong stance on them. E tier is going to be our sleepers, the players who like I actually think, you know, if we're super late in drafts, maybe some players I want to target because they could, you know, really skyrocket up. This tier right here is like, I don't have a strong case here. Like, I think they're going to be fine. I don't know that they're going to be amazing. Chris Rodriguez, and then we've got Sean Tucker. Rodriguez definitely going to be another one of those like early down running backs. My model comps him to Gus Edwards and Jordan Wilkins, if that kind of paints a picture in your mind. He feels like one of those running backs that's going to be annoying because like a team's probably going to want Chris for goal line. They're going to want to have him almost like, I don't want to compliment to Jamal Williams, but like Jamal Williams last season, right? Like maybe that's his like pure ceiling outcome. Like obviously 17 touchdowns, probably not going to happen, but someone like that where it's like they're bringing him in at goal line. He's only getting early down usage, not much in the receiving game. Again, I don't love players like that. And if I'm not even really convinced on like the early down stuff, like I don't have a strong take for it. It's not someone I really want to draft late in drafts. And then Sean Tucker, another former high school state champion. Got a few of those in the draft class. We've seen that in the past. Very explosive runner. Just same thing. Not good in the receiving game. Not really someone who is pass blocking all that much. That's going to really hurt getting on the field in third downs. That's going to hurt fantasy upside. But again, super explosive runner. He handled plenty of touches in college. Some people might be like a tad concerned about the size, 5'9", 207, but you know, that's still pushing where we're totally fine with it. And then plenty of touches in college, so I'm not really too concerned. I just don't think either of these two are ever going to be like fantasy studs. That's kind of why I put them in this tier. E tier, we can get our sleepers. Chase Brown, Evan Hull. We're going to put in Kenny McIntosh as well. We'll talk about it in a second. I don't think people are going to like love that I put him there. But I don't think he deserves to go in the final tier, which we can probably just put on the board now. Chase Brown, crazy athletic, like among backs who like didn't do themselves favors in the combine, like he definitely did. Crazy straight line speed, 85th percentile in every athletic measurement you want, like whatever you want to say, 85th percentile or higher in all of them. Really good production in college, first in percent of team rushing yards, second in percent of teams total yards, third in max touch share, seventh in max touchdown share. Like very, very, very productive. He is a home run hitter. He is someone we talked about like Abanikanda, like can just take a carry, get through the line, and you're like, he's gone. Like he is scoring a touchdown on this play. My model comps him to Elijah Mitchell, you know, like one of those really fast running backs. Probably not like you don't use Elijah Mitchell a ton in the receiving game, but he's still good enough to where like when Mitchell was in that system for the 49ers and they were featuring him on the ground, it did not matter at all that you weren't using him in the receiving game. He was still very, very productive. So I think that sort of outcome is possible for Chase Brown. Again, super athlete, hoping he goes earlier than projected. Hoping he goes to a team without like a truly established back, because like I don't think he comes in here on third downs and dominates. So it's like I want him to win that job on early downs. If that's already filled, that's not as great. Hull, definitely a good sleeper pick, but won't go as early. Like, I'm hoping Chase Brown goes a little bit early in the draft. Like maybe he can creep into like the top 100. Hull's not going to. He's not going to go that early, but an elite receiving profile. So a great receiving back in college, 80th percentile in size adjusted speed. He's got good burst, good agility, elite college production, especially when you factor in the receptions. He had 55 receptions in college last year. That's like really, really good. Like college receptions are obviously like a lot lower in the NFL. They play a lot fewer games. They just don't throw to the running backs like as much over a full season, right? They don't get a full 17 games. 55 receptions is a crazy high number. The model dings him because of that draft capital. So it's like late 6th round is where he's projected to go. So if he can climb early 6th, late 5th round, something like that, he's someone that could definitely rise. So we'll see next week where he actually ends up going. And then Kenny McIntosh, kind of alluded to before. People aren't going to love this one because he ran a 4.62 40-yard dash. And that's only at 204 pounds. So it's like, it wasn't like he was like, 230, like, size adjusted, that speed's totally fine. 204 pounds, he ran a 4.62. That's horrific. That's so bad. 27th percentile size adjusted speed, 19th percentile in burst, poor agility. Like he tested horribly. Why is he here? Well, no one's going to want to draft him because of that. Dynasty community, especially, is probably going to hate him because Dynasty community typically really looks at these like advanced metrics. They're always on like player profiler, looking at like athletic comps and stuff like that. McIntosh is just not going to be in their minds, but he's really good in the receiving game. He's a really, really good receiving back. And he's one of the backs where it's like, theoretically, if a team wanted to, they could feature him. And so no team's going to draft him to do that right away. But if he's a clear backup, mixing in a lot of third downs and the starter goes down, he's someone that I think if you draft late can hit in that way, because if they're forced to, and if he produces well, he will be a 3-down back. And that's not something I've said for very many of these running backs. And so I like the upside. It's just, it would have been nicer if he ran a little bit faster at the combine. And then this last year, we don't need to go over it too much. I'll tell you the athletic comps for each of these running backs. So Keontae Mitchell, Phillip Lindsay is his number one comp. That's not great. Eric Gray gets Alfred Morris as a comp. Not terrible. And then Tian Evans gets Alex Collins. So also not really great. I think Eric Gray is projected to go the earliest among these three. Probably the one I'd say I'm most excited about. I'm not excited about any of them, but especially with the Morris comp, like Morris had productive careers. Like if he was Alfred Morris, that would be a really good outcome for him. And you would want that in fantasy, especially for how late he's probably going to go in fantasy. But I would say that I am not overly excited about any of the running backs in that tier. So that's the tier list. I'll do the same thing probably for wide receivers. I haven't really put that together yet, but if you guys like this video, I will do that for wide receivers. And then I think what'll be interesting is after the actual draft happens, we come back, we do this same thing, we see how the model reevaluates everyone given where they actually went, because let's be honest, we're trying to project things here. We don't know what the actual NFL teams are going to do, who's going to reach, who's going to like really, really fall in the draft for some sort of reason. And then we'll also be able to factor in, well, where'd they go, right? Like what team are they on? What's that backfield kind of look like? But this is what things are looking at right now. You can see a full breakdown for all these players on the website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. You can see how many fantasy points I'm projecting for these players right now, how much the model thinks over the next 3 years, what they're going to do. You can see their dynasty ranking, their redraft ranking, all that again on the website. And if you want to join the Discord, again, completely free this year. Link to that is on the website in the description below, on my Twitter @NickSalikFFA. You can find that pretty much anywhere. So that'll do it for this one. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting the like button? How about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.